Good morning.
Morning. Good morning.
I have lots of little squares on the screen this morning.
Uh-huh.
Welcome everyone. It's nice. I suppose we're getting used to this. Yeah. We transplanted a camellia from late fall to the garden that we're making in front of the abbot's office, and it began blooming the end of this past week. So today after service, if you have a chance, I encourage you. It's particularly beautiful camellia, and it had been underneath the grapes for a number of years and was kind of a little oppressed by us not cutting the grapes back properly, and so it's kind of I think it's happy to be out from underneath the grapes, even though it was a transplant, but a little bit too early to be blooming also. It was very beautiful, but also feels slightly worrisome at the same time. But maybe that's how beauty is. Real beauty probably should unnerve us on some level. I always try to mention something about the connection to the non-human world before I give a talk, and sometimes it connects with what I want to talk about and sometimes it doesn't, but I stopped caring too much about that because I really want to encourage you to it's so easy for us humans in our deep arrogance to think that life is about humans, and while human life is important, human life is just one facet of life, and the more that we can turn our hearts and minds to a wholer conception, a more whole conception of life, which includes humans, but is not only centered on humans, I think will be the better for it. I had the great fortune yesterday to go to a very beautiful and sacred place for the first time. It's known as Chatimanui. The Kalapuya called it Chatimanui. And when settlers came, they called it Mary's Peak. Some of you may have been there before. Chatimanui means Spirit Mountain. It's just south of Philomath, not so far from here. And if you go up to the top of that peak now, you can drive, which is, I'm sure, much less anticlimactic than actually having to walk up the whole way. But you can go almost the way to the top, and then you can walk a little more all the way to the summit. But when you go up there, you're over top of a valley, and so yesterday was quite cloudy in the valley. It was like an ocean of clouds and these islands of pushing up through it, which were the hills, and you could see very clearly these sacred mountains which we live in the presence of, although we oftentimes don't recognize the Three Sisters. And you see all the way up to Hood and Mount St. Helens, and it was really, really amazing. Just to feel the breadth of where we are. And that peak is particularly interesting because oftentimes when you're in a high place, there's someplace higher close to you, so you don't get the full 360 view. But if you go up to Chatimanui, you will be able to see all directions, which is kind of rare. And anyway, I encourage you to visit there if you get a chance. It was beautiful and inspiring to think about the great fortune that we have to live in this beautiful place. Okay, enough of that. So I want to continue talking about the Bodhisattva Vow. Began speaking about that last week a bit, and I brought up right away, one of the things about the Bodhisattva Vow that is oftentimes commented on is its impossibility. So we chant the Bodhisattva Vow at the end of our service on Sunday morning. So beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Do we say boundless in our case? Yeah, we do say it. Yeah. And the Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. So these all seem impossible, or they sound impossible. In fact, they should. Beings are numberless. Even if we just count up the number of beings we could conceive of on this planet, which Buddhism doesn't typically end there. But if you want to kind of keep your rational mind intact a little bit, just think about all the beings you could conceive of as beings on this planet now. It's like way beyond our ability to conceive. But in this Bodhisattva vow, we vow to free them all. Sounds impossible. The numberless, the inexhaustible, the boundless, the unsurpassable, we are vowing to free, to end, to enter, to realize. There is something to be done with regard to these ungraspable quantities, ungraspable presences that we can't even really conceive. I'd like to make the point that this impossibility is precisely the power of the vow. If we think about impossible as being beyond our vision, beyond our grasp, beyond our understanding, I have no idea how we could free all beings. I don't even know how to free myself. Right? So how could it be that I'm going to free all beings? It's beyond my ability to see what the solution would be. But this is precisely the power of a vow. Because the power of the vow is to form and to reform not just what we're seeing, but how we're seeing, how we hold, how we conceive. So if we don't take up something which is beyond our understanding, right, beyond our vision, beyond our grasp, we can't really reform the way that we see things, the way that we hold things, the way that we conceive things, because we just stay in our predictable understanding. Right? So the vow asks us to go beyond that, to do something which isn't just defined by the way that I understand the world now. And last week, I was encouraging people that the first place is to actualize the vow with the full faculty of your heart. And that we have a way of doing that within traditions. That shows up through myth and through ritual. There's a way in which impossibility just is an invitation to kind of say, well, that's a nice ideal, but what could I do on a practical level? And reduce it to practical things quickly. Like there's no way I can free everybody. So how could I just free this particular subset of people? Let me just get to work on that. Right? That's one way we can react to impossibility. But I was encouraging you to not to do that, but to first enter into the heart of the vow, right? To hear the stories of beings, countless beings, generation after generation, that have pledged themselves to live this way and have done really incredible things. To hear the stories of the beings who had come before Buddha, and as they made this vow of the Bodhisattva, the Buddha could see that they were a Buddha. The Buddha could see those beings as Buddhas as they made this vow of the Bodhisattva. And then the Buddha would make a prediction of the Buddhahood of that particular being. Very beautiful in the sutras, if you get a chance to read that. Lotus Sutra is a good place to read about that. To take that in deeply and see that we have to work with our heart. It's not just a matter of tinkering with the world, but we have to work with the depth of our own being. And the vow invites us into that. Zazen is an expression of that vow. It's not just a place where I'm trying to pull myself together, right? But it's a place where I meet this inexhaustible host of beings. Right? When you sit down, do you find that there's a whole world that appears here in your heart, in your mind? The concerns of your daily life? You can look at those concerns of your daily life as a nuisance and think, if I could get rid of those, I would be a good meditator. And if I can't get rid of them, I'm a bad meditator. Right? The vow invites us to something else. It says all those things that seem like a nuisance. I'm sitting down for meditation. Oh, could you just give it a rest? I just want some peace and quiet here. Right? No. Every one of those beings, every one of those thoughts is an invitation to see that the whole world is involved in the freeing of one being. Right? It doesn't happen alone. So that's what I was emphasizing last week. And this week I'd like to move into something else. I'd like to move into the practical. And I want to move into the practical through the impossible. Because I believe that the impossible itself is the practical. We have the habit of thinking, if I could conceive of what it is that I want to do, then I could really do it, right? But I would say most of the things are really, really worth doing. Really, really, like the big things you're going to do in your life, you can't know really what you're up to. You could make a vow. You could make a vow of parenthood. But upon being blessed with children, you have no idea what you're in for. Those of you who have had this blessing, you know what I'm talking about. You know, even your kids are great. You still had no idea what it was going to take to do it, you know. If you think about relationships, you know, if you have romantic relationships with someone and you decide to build your life together with them, right? If you knew what it was going to take on the front end, there's no way. You would say, no. Too much. If someone had these are the manuals, the 78 400-page manuals about what it is to make this work, you would just say no, right? And it's not just that our ignorance, tricks us into it, but there's something else that's happening there, right? For me, the dream of coming back to Oregon and founding a temple, no idea what I was in for, no idea. And here 20 years later, we're sitting in this hall, and I still don't know. But I've learned a little bit about trusting these impossible things. Last week I had quoted from the Diamond Sutra. There's this very pivotal line of the Diamond Sutra right in the beginning, where Subhuti, the Buddha's follower and kind of the partner with the Buddha in the Diamond Sutra. It's a dialogue between the Buddha Shakyamuni and Subhuti. And Subhuti asks the Buddha, as your followers, he doesn't say this part, but this is kind of the context. He's saying, we see that you are a great awakened being and that you live in this straightforward, harmonious way which helps to ease the suffering of the world and bring about liberation. We want to live like that. So, how should we walk? How should we stand? How should we control our thoughts? Those are the words that Subhuti uses in a Sanskrit text. It's slightly different in the Chinese. But basically, we could understand that as he's saying, how should we act? And how should we hold our hearts? In what way should we regard our mind and express our being? And the Buddha says to Subhuti, he says, give rise to a thought. Give rise to a thought that no matter how many beings there are, whether they come from any different way that you can conceive of a being, and that list is great, like towards the end he says, whether they have form or whether they have no form, or whether they neither have form nor no form, right? He's just he's like anything you could conceive of, right? Any of those beings that you will cross over suffering, you will be liberated together with them. Right? That's how you control your mind. That's how you know what to do. He gives him an impossible task to hold in his heart. Now, there's a way in which we can read this as the Buddha abstracting the question. So Buddha's asking this very concrete question. He's like, what should we do? And the Buddha's like, give rise to a thought of this totally impossible thing. But that's not the only way we can read it. The Buddha is not encouraging Subhuti to become very abstract about his life. Right? He's encouraging him to be completely practical in the meeting of the ungraspable. Right? To meet the ungraspable. It's not enough to say, I have this idea. He's actually encouraging him to get out of his abstraction that there is this sort of program which we could define. Act like this, do this with your mind, and then everything will work out. You will be like me, right? You will be awakened. He says, no, it's more practical than that. It's ungraspable. You actually have to meet something. You can't just kind of get your idea all firm in your chest and then inflict it upon the world. Right? You have to meet the world. You have to meet something which you can't control. And you got to come back to it again and again and again and again. Right? Again, those of you who have been blessed with children, you know it's like this. You have to meet them again and again and again. And as soon as you decide that controlling them is your work as a parent, you're in for big trouble. I mean, if you're lucky, it will come back around to you instantaneously, which it often does, and you will readjust your attitude. But usually what happens is we inflict this on our kids, and then somewhere, later on it comes back around to us, and then we have to work with it. I was blessed to be a school teacher for a long time, which I miss a lot. And that's something, especially when I was teaching middle school. I have a strong voice. I'm big. I can be scary. So I could do a certain amount of control. It shut everything down. And I did that. I exerted that kind of control. And I had to feel, oh, wait a minute. What am I trying to do here? Once they started really behaving, it's so boring. And you're not really living, right? The liveliness that could be there is like drained out of everything. And oh, this isn't what I wanted. You have to find something else. I remember when I was a boy, and I grew up in Salem, and sometimes we would go up to OMSI, which is I forget what it stands for, Oregon something in Sciences.
Oregon Museum of Science and Industry.
Thank you. And it used to be up by the zoo. And then it moved on to the waterfront, and really fun, like these museums where you get to do things. You don't just look at something, especially as a kid, you go to these museums. It's like, my dad was the worst. He would read everything, like that was on every exhibit, so you'd be there for hours, and you couldn't touch anything. It was horrible. But when we went to OMSI, it was great because you could touch stuff, right? Which is good. You like to touch stuff. And they had these boxes, and you would put your hand in these boxes. They had kind of a rubber sleeve on it, and you would put your hands in. It was super scary, right? Because you didn't know what you were going to touch. And then inside there was something that you were going to touch. Not COVID safe, I would suppose. And then you would try to guess what it was. And then you could do that for a while, and then you could walk around the back, I think it was, and you opened them up, and then you could see what was in the boxes. We played another game sometimes, like when I'd be at summer camp or something, we have a brown paper bag and someone would put something in it, and then you put it and you try to figure out what it was. That one had grosser things than the OMSI one. I think the OMSI ones had to be more like, over time. But I was thinking about this morning how the fun that game is, and how it's like what I'm talking about here. When you can when you can see clearly what it is that you're going to do, you say, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And in fact, you can ignore the material at hand, because your vision is so strong. But what's that like when you put your hand into one of these boxes? You have to really feel in a different way. Try closing your eyes when you touch something, especially very familiar things. And you could ask yourself, do I actually touch them with my hand? Do I feel them with my hand? You touch them, like say if you're picking them up or something, but do you feel it? Or do you simply assume that you're feeling it because you can see it and you've named it, you know what it is, etc.? So this impossible is one of the ways that the Dharma, that these vows, they invite us into a practical meeting, a real meeting, an actual meeting, not the meeting of our idea about a situation, about a thing, about a person, but an actual meeting with what is there. It has to do with embracing the gap between our planning and our doing. We can have very complicated planning about everything. Anybody who's ever built something, you have this wonderful plan about how it's going to be to build this thing. And then you get in the middle of it and you're like, oh, I didn't think about that. Of course you didn't. Of course there'll be many things you couldn't think of in the thing it is that you're building. And then you have to figure it out right in the present. Right? You have to figure out, how does it fit together? In one of Dogen Zenji, the founder of this school of Zen Buddhism in Japan, one of his writings, he says, to truly hit the mark means to not find a new nest. To truly hit the mark means to not find a new nest. Not to find a new place that feels like, oh, okay, I know what's going on now. Right? I would say if we're not struggling with things, we're probably not carrying out the Bodhisattva vow. It's just opposite. We think like, oh, if I could just have Bodhisattva vow, everything would be clear, straightforward. What I'm saying here is just the opposite. If you're not kind of like at your wit's end about some things, you're probably pretty asleep about a lot of things. That actually coming to your wit's ends is where you're invited into something else. When we're very assured of our view, assured of our position, assured that our action is right. That's a place to be very careful. You know, I see this rampant in society today. I'm part of this thing. Anybody a next door neighbor? You get this little like a listserv, is that what they call it? You know, on the thing next door. It's great. I'm glad to have it, but mostly I can't read it. But mostly what I can't read is just people's diatribes about how right they are, particularly about masks. Okay. I think we should wear masks. Totally in support of it. But the amount of energy that's going into grabbing onto a particular thing to make us feel safe. I get it. This is a scary time. I get it. But oftentimes our reaction to that is to try to assure ourselves that our view is correct. Right? That becomes the automatic modality. What I'm proposing here is that leaning into the discomfort of not knowing for sure and then struggling in a really practical way to try to make practical decisions, here in this assembly. We try to make those decisions, thinking about all the time. How can we be COVID safe and still have assembly? At what point do we need to shut it down completely? Do we need a plexiglass screen for the speaker or not? Right? What are the proper distances? And we're working with these things all the time. Now, I'm not making the point here that you should just take up a position of relativity, which is another position. Right? Relativity is just another position to say, well, everyone has their own way of seeing it, and everyone has their own truth, which kind of begs the question, what is truth? If everyone gets to have their own. But the point being that also becomes a position, like a kind of, I won't take a position on anything. I won't actually say I'm going to do this or that because it's all relative. Right? That also can be really disempowering. What I'm saying here is that you've got to risk it. The vow encourages you to risk it, to get to the edge of your experience, knowing what you should be doing or how you should be doing it. That's where the vow can really come to life. That's where the navigation is possible. This is where the practical starts to enter into it. Right there at that edge where I don't know what will I do? How will I act? And in that way, the impossible is not only practical, it's also very intimate. We have to be meeting something genuinely, whether that's another person or group of people, whether that's material things, whether that's the camellia, whatever it is. Right? To meet them intimately then allows us to practice. Thinking about the difference between the kind of get her done attitude versus the intimacy with attitude. I remember many years ago, we were building a meditation hall out at someone's farm. Sado Martin, the teacher of Zen West and Empty Field Zen Center, Empty Field Zen Do, I think. And we were building this meditation hall, and it's out on the farm. It's really beautiful. I would encourage you to go look at her website. And I think with COVID, things are pretty shut down now, but she holds retreats and things out there, and also has a place in town. But we were building this, and this was just about the time. I'm going to talk about you, Kogen, a little bit. Sorry for not asking. Kogen was just starting at the temple a bit, and he's a master carpenter, and we didn't know that. But he was sort of slowly saying, hey, what if you did this way rather than that way? Because we were just, I had done a little carpentry, but I wasn't very, proficient. And so the thing was changing after a while. And when we got to building the roof structure, Kogen had said, hey, I know somebody who can saw really wonderful wood for this. And the place is, pretty close to here, and they selectively harvest their land, and they mill the lumber. And this would be great to do all the roof framing from. It would really have a kind of quality that just buying the standard lumber from the lumberyard, you can't really have. And so, oh, great, good idea. That sounds wonderful. And so Kogen went and worked with his friend and obtained all of this lumber. And we got it on site. And I started to cut the joints to fit together this roof, which was not an uncomplicated roof. It was a modified hip roof. If you're a carpenter, if you've ever done that kind of work, you know that's a little bit of a scary roof. It has a lot of compound angle joints that you have to cut. And so we got the wood, and I started cutting it, and I realized that the wood was, because it was rough sawn, everything was a little bit different size. Every piece is a little bit different size. Oh my gosh. How are you going to cut those joints? How are you going to cut those? See, I had only learned about measuring from the side of the board to determine where you're going to cut. Why? Because I worked with dimensional lumber that has gone through an industrial process in which every board is exactly the same. Right? Sometimes it's got a twist in it. You've got to pay attention to a number of things. But you don't have to worry too much about the size of the board. So you just measure off the side all the time. But now I had this lumber, that wasn't going to work. And so Kogen showed me patiently, well, actually, you have to find the center. Right? There's a metaphor in there. Right? You have to find the center of that board. Physically, you have to, measure and try to find where the center is, and you have to work your angle off the center. So it's a practical thing, right? Because every board has a center, and actually, the center is in exactly the same place of all the boards, right in the middle. But their edges are different, right? Just like us, our edges are different, but there's a center. So we have to look for that center, and then base the interaction from that place. And so Kogen was very patient, and we spent a lot of time cutting those joints to fit together that roof. We would have had it framed probably in a day and a half had we used dimensional lumber. I don't remember how many days we were up there. It was a lot. Totally worth it. Totally worth it. But think about all the things in your life where is it get or done attitude? Or are we going to actually find the center of the beings that you are with and then work from there? The vow, the impossibility of the vow, encourages us to look into that center place. Again, many of my examples are from being a school teacher because I did that for so long. I remember one time when I was teaching high school, I had a student in my class who was he was just so ticked off at school because people were pushing him around all the time. I got it, like he was sick of being told not to use his cell phone in class and blah, 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 blah. And he came into class, I remember, just with this attitude, right, right away. I kind of specialized in these students, one of my specialties. So right away I was like, okay, this guy, I know. He's not the standard framing lumber, right? I'm not just going to be able to say, oh, I know where your edge is. I'm going to be able to find your center really easily by just measuring off the side. I'm going to have to see him. We spent many days going to the hallway at some point and me saying, hey, what's going on? And he'd tell me what was going on. I'd be like, yeah, that sucks. And what I noticed in class was when you do this, or this, it's not just that there's a rule against that, but it really impacts everybody around you. And it really impacts me as the teacher. And we did that day after day after day. And pretty soon, his demeanor shifted. His capacity to speak in the class, his capacity to be connected with the other students. And to know that he had a place there because his center was recognized and seen. Not just, do you stack up right? Like, how many of you can we get on a pallet because we need to truck this out to the university, right? Something else happening there. A vow opens us up to this kind of activity. It's not efficient necessarily. It can be efficient, but it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to get someone in and out, maximize the output, minimize the problems, then an industrial process might work pretty good for some of that. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. But if we're talking about freeing beings, we've got a different kind of question. So, a profound commitment through vow allows us to make clear and connected decisions, but clear and connected decisions to what is actually met, as opposed to clear decisions that are made just from the abstraction of what I've decided it is that I want to inflict upon the world. And great things come from that. Sometimes this is about a life course. What should I do? What should I do with my life? And at different points in your life, you might come across that question. What's really worth doing? What am I good at doing? What do I like doing? Right? How can I exercise that? When it's an abstract question, all of us have to become, like social revolutionaries. Maybe you could get away with doctor. Some people think priest, but it's highly questionable. A school teacher maybe, But of course, we need all kinds of people. That's just abstract thing. Like, how could I save the world? What I'm saying here is, if we're talking about life course questions of vow, if we want to get practical about it, right? Don't go for the abstract. Meet the world. Meet the actuality of your life. Who is there? What is there? To what extent are you holding them in your vision of what you think they should be to line up with what your program is? And what degree are you able to meet? Not like devoid of expectation or any kind of rigor or anything, but I mean, really you meet those beings. What would it mean to try to liberate that material, to try to liberate that piece of wood, rather than just to fit it into your plan? So sometimes in those big life course decisions, that's where vow shows up. But I'd say more often it's showing up in particular situations. What are you going to do in the particular situation? I would say this, that the vow to wake up together with all beings, to end delusion, to walk through all of the Dharma gates that are showing up as all kinds of different situations and things in your life, and to actualize awakening, that those things do not happen apart from the concrete meetings of your life. They happen through those things. So the things that you meet that feel challenging, that feel ungraspable, that feel unnavigable, that's the place where you come back and you say, okay, I'm in it for this thing that's beyond my grasp. And that thing that's beyond my grasp now can inform you about where your decisions are going, because you're at the edge of your conception. And that heart work that we talked about last week now will serve you in a very practical way, because you say, this is the choice I make in this situation. Not abstract. We have time for a couple questions. Hi.
Can you say a little bit more about the center and how you know when you've touched?
You don't know. You keep looking. And once you know, then you can't work with it anymore. So that's the point. Like if we go to the metaphor of the wood, for example, you find the center so that you start working from the center. But if you lose your attention because you think you found the center, you'll cut it wrong, right? So finding the center is not just about, okay, I'll get rid of the edges, establish the center, and now I know what to do. It's more like I have to have a constant attention for centering. And in that constant attention for centering, then I'm moving from that as the basis, as opposed to thinking I know what the edges are, just kind of using this metaphorically. And the only way to be able to see the center, or to look for the center, or do the centering looking, is that our own being is completely involved in that in terms of centering. So that's one of the things we're really studying in meditation practice is, how do I allow for this centering to be present, right? Like if I find it, I'll build this edifice around it, and then my body will get stiff, right? And I'll be kind of holding. I've switched to the edge perspective, and I'm kind of hard now. But when I feel for that centering, the balance, the uprightness that is naturally buoyant, that I can't clamp down on it. And then in the practice of seeing that way, seeing, feeling, experiencing that way, and then I'm looking at beings that seem to be outside of myself, I can see them with that eye. And that same thing that I see in myself, I also see in beings out here. And some other world can emerge from that.
Hey Joe, maybe this is, drifting off the same thing, which it probably is. Can you talk about, I'm always exploring in my practice, I will have a red flag go off in my own heart about something, and then I'll pivot somewhere. But so often I find that I'm really standing in the same place.
Yeah.
And that I'm not actually, I'm still in a mind of use, in a mind of corralling something somewhere. How is it that you really open a genuine invitation to this kind of beholding something? thing,
Yeah.
and really looking rather than artificial pivoting that we can fall into and call that practice.
Right. Yeah. We are so addicted to being right, and one way that shows up is like insistence in our own view as being right. But another way it shows up is our like speedy pivots to righteousness, and the issue with that is that we're always still pivoting around the same thing, which is our own rightness. And that's not an invitation to just say, well, I should never try to do anything differently. I just do it the way I do it. That's me. I don't mean that, of course. But I mean that can we meet intimately and deeply our own delusion, our own greed, our own hate. If we don't do that, we're always just avoiding greed, hate, and delusion. If we're running away from greed, hate, and delusion, it will control us, right? So we have to turn and face it. So in this way, I think the red flag is really important, to cultivate the ability to experience the red flag. Whoa, I'm doing something weird here, right? Super, super important. And then at that place, rather than saying, how do I fix it? Or just kind of quickly jerking away from what the red flag is, think of the centering that Myoben and I were just talking about. So if you say, I'm going to center, and I'm going to look at that red flag with that eye of centering, I'm going to find out something there, which is different than I'm going to ping over here. I'll probably be quite off-centered. I'm probably off-centered in the red flag showing up probably has to do with being off-centered. And so if I just ping somewhere else, I'll just replicate that off-centeredness in another way. The off-centeredness to the left will become the off-centeredness to the right, but it has the same, kind of effect. So that centering quality is so important, and that's also why vow needs to be something that's impossible. Because the center is the place where all the subject-object way of dealing with things, it's not possible anymore. The old alchemists were always dealing with this. What's the relationship between the center of a circle and the circumference and a square? Pi is an irrational number. I'm getting a little out there right now, but you never get to solve it, right? It just keeps going and going and going. And so that's the heart we want to cultivate, the centering of that circle, the relationship between the ability to measure and in linear ways and the circleness of the circle. That's the mystery of the center, right? So that irrational number that keeps going and going and going and going, how invested are we in it? Or do we just say, oh no, 3.914? Is that what it is?
3.4 something.
3.1.
3.14. Yeah, 3.149? 3.141, whatever it is. Once you get down to the thousandths or whatever, for everything we do on a practical level, seems like it should work. I mean, sure, there's some particle physics stuff that is a little more intense, whatever. But I once heard this incredible man. It was on the radio. Recite pi. He's a savant, and he has this capacity to just recites it. And when they ask him about it, he says, "I just see it, just like you see the scenery." And it has color and texture and everything to me. And he said, I can just recite for as long as you want. And he was performing this. The thing that I heard is he would go to it would be like a show, and he would just recite it for an hour. And people have these crazy spiritual experiences, and just it was really amazing to hear him do it. And I didn't go to one of the shows, I just heard it on the radio, and it was only 5 minutes or something, but it was quite.
Saying the numbers.
Yeah, he can just
keep saying them.
Yeah, it just keeps going, because that number there's never going to be a decimal point that ends it, right? Anyway, I've gotten a little bit off here, but when we're talking about red flags, are we in the place where we want to be able to say, oh, this is pi, boom, and this is what it is, and this is how I can do it? Or are we willing to develop a centered relationship with whatever that red flag is? And when we develop when we invest in the centered relationship with that red flag, now we have a possibility for transformation rather than just kind of leveraging it into something else.
I'm laughing because I'm just realizing how much it pisses me off that I don't get anything.
Yeah.
Like it takes a humongous amount of energy.
Yeah, yeah.
I just wonder all this time. I'm just so like I turn there and it takes this whole this revolution to get to that place. And the part of me that just got unraveled in that process. Is so frustrated that its whole desire to get something figured out and hammered in the hand no longer gets to happen.
Yeah. So this is the place where, that we have to feel for how not getting anything and getting everything are not so different. That's the place where our capacity to own, we're so addicted to our capacity to own something, that's the very thing that isolates us from the great bounty of life. And there is a very dynamic way that our consciousness works. It's just inviting us moment after moment after moment to not own, to not sit in the new nest, but to be completely alive with what is given to us right from the beginning. So, but yeah, that I know the frustration. It's good to know the frustration. Okay, well, don't forget to see the camellia today if you like that kind of thing. Mm.